Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer. Chapter 7. Heavier Boots. 12 weekends later was the first performance of Hamlet, although it was actually an abbreviated modern version because the real Hamlet is too long and confusing, and most of the kids in my class have ADD. For example, the famous "to be or not to be" speech, which I know about from the collected Shakespeare set Grandma brought me, was cut down so that it was just "to be or not to be? That's the question." Everyone had to have a part, but there weren't enough real parts, and I didn't go to the auditions because my boots were too heavy to go to school that day, so I got the part of Yorick. At first, that made me self-conscious. I suggested to Mrs. Wrigley that maybe I could just play a tambourine in the orchestra or something. She said, "There is no orchestra." I said, "Still." She told me, "It'll be terrific. You'll wear all black, and the makeup crew will paint your hands and neck black, and the costume crew will create some sort of papier-mâché skull for you to wear over your head. It'll really give the illusion that you don't have a body." I thought about that for a minute, and then I told her my better idea. Okay, what I'll do is I'll invent an invisibility suit that has a camera on my back that takes video of everything behind me and just plays it on a plasma screen that I'll wear on my front, which will cover everything except my face. It'll look like I'm not there at all. She said, "Nifty." I said, "But is York even a part?" She whispered into my ear, "If anything, I'm afraid you'll steal the show." Then I was excited to be Yorick. Opening night was pretty great. We had a fog machine, so the cemetery was just like a cemetery in a movie. "Alas, poor Yorick," Jimmy Snyder said, holding my face. "I knew him, Horatio." I didn't have a plasma screen because the costumes budget wasn't big enough, but from underneath the skull I could look around without anyone noticing. I saw lots of people I knew, which made me feel special. Mom and Ron and Grandma were there, obviously. Toothpaste was there with Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton, which was nice, and Mr. and Mrs. Minch were there too because the Minch was Guildenstern. A lot of the blacks that I had met in those 12 weekends were there. Abe was there, Abby, Agnes was there. They're actually sitting next to each other, although they didn't realize it. I saw Albert and Alice and Alan and Arnold and Barbara and Barry. There must have been half the audience. But what was weird was that they didn't know what they had in common, which was kind of like how I didn't know what the thumbtack, the bent spoon, square of aluminum foil, and all those other things I dug up in Central Park had to do with each other. I was incredibly nervous, but I maintained my confidence and was extremely subtle. I know because there was a standing ovation, which made me feel like $100. The second performance was also pretty great. Mom was there, but Ron had to work late. That was okay, though, because I didn't really want him there anyway. Grandma was there, obviously. I didn't see any of the other blacks, but I knew that most people only go to one show unless they're your parents, so I didn't feel too bad about that. I tried to give an extra special performance, and I think I did. "Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. A really funny and excellent guy. I used to ride on his back all the time, and now, it's so awful to think about." Only Grandma came to the next night. Mom had a late meeting because one of her cases was about to go to trial, and I didn't ask where Ron was because I was embarrassed, and I didn't want him there anyway. As I was standing as still as I could, with Jimmy Snyder's hand under my chin, I wondered, what's the point of giving an extremely subtle performance if basically no one is watching? Grandma didn't come backstage to say hi before the performance the next night, or bye after, but I saw that she was there. Through the eye sockets I could see her standing in the back of the gym, under the basketball hoop. Her makeup was absorbing the lighting in a fascinating way, which made her look almost ultraviolet. Alas, poor Yorick. I was as still as I could be, and the whole time I was thinking, what trial is more important than the greatest play in history? The next performance was only Grandma again. She cried at all the wrong times and cracked up at all the wrong times. She applauded when the audience found out the news that Ophelia drowned, which is supposed to be bad news, and she booed when Hamlet scored his first point in the duel against Laertes at the end, which is good for obvious reasons. "This is where his lips were that I used to kiss a lot. Where are your jokes now? Your games? Your songs?" Backstage, before closing night, Jimmy Snyder imitated Grandma to the rest of the cast and crew. I guess I hadn't realized how loud she was. I'd gotten so angry at myself for noticing her, but I was wrong. It was her fault. Everyone noticed. Jimmy did her exactly right. The way she swatted her left hand at something funny, like there was a fly in front of her face. The way she tilted her head like she was concentrating incredibly hard on something. And how she sneezed and told herself, "God bless me!" And how she cried and said, "That's sad," so everyone could hear it. I just sat there while he made all the kids crack up. Even Mrs. Wrigley cracked up. And so did her husband, who played the piano during the set changes. I didn't mention that she was my grandma, and I didn't tell him to stop. Outside, I was cracking up too. Inside, I was wishing that she were tucked away in a portable pocket, or that she'd also had an invisibility suit. I wish the two of us just could go away somewhere far away, like the sixth borough. She was there again that night, in the back row, although only the first 3 rows were taken. I watched her from under the skull. She had her hand pressed up against her ultraviolet heart, and I could hear her saying, "That's sad. That's so sad." I thought about the unfinished scarf and the rock she carried across Broadway and how she had lived so much life but still needed imaginary friends, and the 1,000 thumb wars. Margie Carson. "Hey, Hamlet, where's Polonius?" Jimmy Snyder. "At supper." Margie Carson. "At supper? Where?" Jimmy Snyder. "Not where he eats, but where he's eaten." Margie Carson. "Wow." Jimmy Snyder. "A king can end up going through the guts of a beggar." I felt that night, on that stage, under that skull, incredibly close to everything in the universe, but also extremely alone. I wondered, for the first time in my life, if life was worth all the work it took to live. What exactly made it worth it? What's so horrible about being dead forever and not feeling anything and not even dreaming? What's so great about feeling and dreaming? Jimmy put his hands under my face. This is where his lips were that I used to kiss a lot. Where are your jokes now? Your games? Your songs? Maybe it was because of everything that had happened in those 12 weeks. Or maybe it was because I felt so close and alone that night. I just couldn't be dead any longer. Me. Alas, poor Hamlet. I take Jimmy Snyder's face into my hand. I knew him, Horatio. Jimmy Snyder. But you're only a skull. Me. So what? I don't care. Screw you. Jimmy Snyder whispers, "This is not in the play." He looks for help from Mrs. Wrigley, who is in the front row flipping through the script. She draws circles in the air with her right hand, which is the universal sign for improvise. Me. I knew him, Horatio, a jerk of infinite stupidity, a most excellent masturbator in the second-floor boys' bathroom. I have proof. Also, he's dyslexic. Jimmy Snyder. Can't think of anything to say. Me. Where be your gibes now, your gambols, your songs? Jimmy Snyder. What are you talking about? Me. Raises hand to scoreboard. Succotash my cocker spaniel, you fudging crevasse-hole dipshitaki. Jimmy Snyder. Huh? Me. You're guilty of having abused those less strong than you, of making the lives of nerds like me and Toothpaste and the Minch almost impossible, of imitating mental retards, of prank-calling people who get almost no phone calls anyway, of terrorizing domesticated animals and old people, who, by the way, are smarter and more knowledgeable than you, of making fun of me just because I have a pussy, and I've seen you litter, too. Jimmy Snyder. I never prank-called any retards. Me. You were adopted. Jimmy Snyder. Searches audience for his parents. Me. And nobody loves you. Jimmy Snyder. His eyes fill with tears. Me. And you have amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Jimmy Snyder. Huh? Me. On behalf of the dead. I pull the skull off my head, even though it's made of paper mache, it's really hard. I smash it against Jimmy Snyder's head, and I smash it again. He falls to the ground because he's unconscious, and I can't believe how strong I actually am. I smash his head again with all my force, and blood starts to come out of his nose and ears, but I still don't feel any sympathy for him. I want him to bleed because he deserves it, and nothing else makes any sense. Dad doesn't make sense. Mom doesn't make sense. The audience doesn't make sense. The folding chairs and fog machine fog don't make any sense. Shakespeare doesn't make any sense. The stars that I know are on the other side of the gym ceiling don't make any sense. The only thing that makes any sense right now is my smashing Jimmy Snyder's face. His blood. I knock a bunch of his teeth into his mouth, and I think they go down his throat. There's blood everywhere, covering everything. I keep smashing the skull against his head, which is also Ron's skull for letting Mom get on with life, and Mom's skull for getting on with life, and Dad's skull for dying, and Grandma's skull for embarrassing me so much, and Dr. Fine's skull for asking if any good could come out of Dad's death, and the skulls of everyone else I know. The audience is applauding, all of them, because I am making so much sense. They're giving me a standing ovation as I hit him again and again. I hear them call. The audience. Thank you, Oskar. We love you so much. We'll protect you. It would have been great. I looked out across the audience from underneath the skull, with Jimmy's hand under my chin. Alas, poor Yorick. I saw Abe Black, and he saw me. I knew that we were sharing something with our eyes, but I didn't know what, and I didn't know if it mattered. It was 12 weekends earlier that I'd gone to visit Abe Black in Coney Island. I'm very idealistic, but I knew I couldn't walk that far, so I took a cab. Even before we were out of Manhattan, I realized that the $7.68 in my wallet wasn't going to be enough. I don't know if you'd count it as a lie or not, that I didn't say anything. It's just that I knew I had to get there, and there was no alternative. When the cab driver pulled over in front of the building, the meter said $76.50. I said, "Mr. Mahaltra, are you an optimist or a pessimist?" He said, "What?" I said, "Because unfortunately, I only have $7.68. $7.68. This is not happening. Unfortunately, it is, but if you give me your address, I promise I'll send you the rest." He put his head down on the steering wheel. I asked if he was okay. He said, "Keep your $7.68. I said, "I promise I'll send you the money. I promise." He handed me his card, which was actually the card of a dentist, but he had written his address on the other side. Then he said something in some other language that wasn't French. "Are you mad at me?" Obviously, I'm incredibly panicky about roller coasters, but Abe convinced me to ride one with him. "It would be a shame to die without riding the Cyclone," he told me. "It would be a shame to die," I told him. "Yeah," he said, "but with the Cyclone you can choose." We sat in the front car, and Abe lifted his hands in the air on the downhill parts. I kept wondering if what I was feeling was at all like falling. In my head, I tried to calculate all the forces that kept the car on the tracks and me in the car. There was gravity, obviously, and centrifugal force, and momentum, and the friction between the wheels on the tracks, and wind resistance, I think, or something. Dad used to teach me physics with crayons on paper and tablecloths while we waited for our pancakes. He would have been able to explain everything. The ocean smelled weird, and so did the food that they were selling on the boardwalk, like funnel cakes and cotton candy and hot dogs. It was an almost perfect day, except that Abe didn't know anything about the key or about Dad. He said that he was driving into Manhattan and could give me a ride if I wanted one. I told him, "I don't get in cars with strangers." "And how did you know I was going to Manhattan?" He said, "We aren't strangers, and I don't know how I knew." "Do you have an SUV?" "No." "Good." "Do you have a gas-electric hybrid car?" "No." "Bad." While we were in the car, I told him all about how I was going to meet everyone in New York with the last name Black. He said, "I can relate in my own way because I had a dog run away once. She was the best dog in the world. I couldn't have loved her any more or treated her better. She didn't want to run away. She just got confused and followed one thing and then another." "But my dad didn't run away," I said. "He was killed in a terrorist attack." Abe said, "I was thinking of you." He went up with me to the door of Ada Black's apartment, even though I told him I could do it myself. "I'll feel better knowing that you made it here safely," he said, which sounded like Mom. Ada Black owned 2 Picasso paintings. She didn't know anything about the key, so the paintings meant nothing to me, even if I knew they were famous. She said I could have a seat on the couch if I wanted to, but I told her I didn't believe in leather, so I stood. Her apartment was the most amazing apartment I'd ever been in. The floors were like marble chessboards, and the ceilings were like cakes. Everything seemed like it belonged in a museum, so I took some pictures with Grandpa's camera. "This might be a rude question, but are you the richest person in the world?" She touched a lampshade and said, "I'm the 467th richest person in the world." I asked her how it made her feel to know that there were homeless people and millionaires living in the same city. She said, "I give a lot to charity, if that's what you're getting at." I told her that I wasn't getting at anything and that I just wanted to know how she felt. "I feel fine," she said, and she asked me if I wanted something to drink. I asked her for a coffee, and she asked someone in another room for a coffee. And then I asked her if she thought that maybe no one should have more than a certain amount of money until everyone had that amount of money. That was an idea Dad had once suggested to me. She said, "The Upper West Side isn't free, you know." I asked her how she knew that I lived on the Upper West Side. "Do you have things that you don't need?" "Not really." "You collect coins?" "How did you know I collect coins?" "Lots of young people collect coins." I told her, "I need them." "Do you need them as much as a homeless person needs food?" The conversation was beginning to make me feel self-conscious. She said, "Do you have more things that you need or more things that you don't need?" I said, "It depends on what it means to need." She said, "Believe it or not, I used to be idealistic." I asked her what idealistic meant. "It means you live by what you think is right." "You don't do that anymore?" "There are questions I don't ask anymore." An African-American woman brought me coffee on a silver tray. I told her, "Your uniform is incredibly beautiful." She looked at Ada. "Really," I said, "I think light blue is a very, very beautiful color on you." She was still looking at Ada, who said, "Thanks, Gail." As she walked back to the kitchen, I told her, "Gail is a beautiful name." When it was just the 2 of us again, Ada told me, "Oskar, I think you made Gail feel quite uncomfortable." "What do you mean?" "I could tell that she felt embarrassed." "I was just trying to be nice." "You might have tried too hard." "How can you try too hard to be nice?" You're being condescending. What's that? You were talking to her like she was a child. No, I wasn't. There's no shame in being a maid. She does a serious job, and I pay her well. I said, I was just trying to be nice. And then I wondered, did I tell her my name was Oskar? We sat there for a while. She stared out the window like she was waiting for something to happen in Central Park. I asked, would it be okay if I snooped around your apartment? She laughed and said, finally someone says what he's thinking. I looked around a bit, and there were so many rooms that I wondered if the apartment's inside was bigger than its outside, but I didn't find any clues. When I came back, she asked if I wanted a finger sandwich, which freaked me out, but I was very polite and just said, Jose. Pardon? Jose. I'm sorry, I don't understand what that means. Jose as in, no way. She said, I know what I am. I nodded my head, even though I didn't know what she was talking about, or what it had to do with anything. Even if I don't like what I am, I know what I am. My children like what they are, but they don't know what they are. So tell me which is worse. What are the options again? She cracked up and said, I like you. I showed her the key, but she had never seen it and couldn't tell me anything about it. Even though I told her I didn't need any help, she made the doorman promise to put me in a cab. I told her I couldn't afford a cab. She said, I can. I gave her my card. She said, good luck, and put her hands on my cheeks and kissed the top of my head. That was Saturday, and it was depressing. Dear Oskar Shell, thank you for your contribution to the American Diabetes Foundation. Every dollar, or in your case, 50 cents, counts. I have enclosed some additional literature about the foundation, including our mission statement, a brochure featuring past activities and successes, as well as some information about our future goals, both short and long term. Thank you once more for contributing to this urgent cause. You're saving lives. With gratitude, Patricia Roxbury, President, New York Chapter. This might be hard to believe, but the next Black lived in our building, just one floor above us. If it weren't my life, I wouldn't have believed it. I went to the lobby and asked Stan what he knew about the person who lived in 6A. He said, never seen anyone go in or come out, just a lot of deliveries and a lot of trash. Cool. He leaned down and whispered, haunted. I whispered back, I don't believe in the paranormal. He said, ghosts don't care if you believe in them. And even though I was an atheist, I knew he wasn't right. I walked back up the steps, this time past our floor and into the 6th. There was a mat in front of the door which said welcome in 12 different languages. That didn't seem like something a ghost would put in front of his apartment. I tried the key in the lock, but it didn't work, so I rang the buzzer, which was exactly where our buzzer was. I heard some noise inside and maybe even some creepy music, but I was brave and just stood there. After an incredibly long time, the door opened. Can I help you? An old man asked, but he asked it extremely loudly, so it was more like a scream. Yes, hello, I said. I live downstairs in 5A. May I please ask you a few questions? Hello, young man, he said. He was the kind of weird looking because he had on a red beret like a French person and an eye patch like a pirate. He said, I'm Mr. Black. I said, I know. He turned around and started walking into his apartment. I guess I was supposed to follow him, so I did. Another thing that was weird was that his apartment looked exactly like our apartment. The floors were the same, the windowsills were the same, even the tiles on the fireplace were the same color green. But his apartment was also incredibly different, because it was filled with different stuff. Tons of stuff. Stuff everywhere. Also, there was a huge column right in the middle of the dining room. It was as big as 2 refrigerators, and it made it impossible for the room to have a table or anything else in it like ours did. What's that for? I asked, but he didn't hear me. There were a bunch of dolls and other things on the mantel, and the floors were filled with little rugs. I got those in Iceland, he said, pointing at the seashells on the windowsill. He pointed at a sword on the wall and said, got that in Japan. I asked him if it was a samurai sword. He said, it's a replica. I said, cool. He led me to the kitchen table, which was where our kitchen table was, and he sat down and slapped his hand against his knee. Well, he said so loudly that I wanted to cover my ears, I've had a pretty amazing life. I thought it was weird that he'd say that because I didn't ask him about his life. I didn't tell him why I was there. I was born on January 1st, 1900. I lived every day of the 20th century. Really. My mother altered my birth certificate so I could fight in the First World War. That was the only lie she ever told. I was engaged to Fitzgerald's sister. Who's Fitzgerald? Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald, my boy. A great author. Oops. I used to sit on her porch and talk to her father while she powdered her nose upstairs. Her father and I had the most lively conversations. He was a great man, like Winston Churchill was a great man. I decided that it would be better to Google Winston Churchill when I got home instead of mentioning that I didn't know who he was. One day she came downstairs and was ready to go.
I told her to hold on a minute because her father and I were right smack in the middle of a terrific conversation, and you can't interrupt a terrific conversation, right? I don't know. Later that night, I was dropping her off in the same porch. She said, "Sometimes I wonder if you like my father more than me." I inherited that damn honesty from my mother, and it caught up with me again. I told her, "Well, I do." Well, that was the last time I told her I do, if you know what I mean. I don't. I blew it. Boy, did I blow it. He started cracking up extremely loudly, and he slapped his knee. I said, "That's hilarious," because it must have been for him to crack up so much. "Hilarious," he said. "It is. I never heard from her again. Oh well. So many people enter and leave your life. Hundreds of thousands of people. You have to keep the door open so they can come in. But it also means you have to let them go." He put a tea kettle on the stove. "You're wise," I told him. "I've had enough time to get wise. See this," he hollered, and he flipped up his eye patch. "That's from Nazi shrapnel. I was a war correspondent and ended up attaching myself to a British tank corps going up the Rhine. We were ambushed one afternoon towards the end of 44. I bled my eye all over the page I was writing on, but those sons of bitches couldn't stop me. I finished my sentence." "What was the sentence?" Who can remember? The point is, I wasn't going to let those bastard krauts stop my pen. It's mightier than the sword, you know. And the MG34. "Could you please put the patch back?" "See that?" he said, pointing at the kitchen floor, but I couldn't stop thinking about his eye. "There's oak under those rugs. Quarter sawn oak. I should know. I laid it myself." "Jose," I said. And I wasn't just saying it to be nice. I was keeping a list in my head of things I could do to be more like him. "My wife and I renovated this kitchen ourselves, with these hands." He showed me his hands. They looked like the hands on the skeleton in the Rainier Scientific Catalog that Ron offered to buy for me, except that they had skin. Blotchy skin, and I didn't want gifts from Ron. "Your wife now?" The tea kettle started to whistle. "Oh," he said. "She died 24 years ago. Long time ago. Yesterday in my life." "Whoops." "It's okay." "You don't feel bad that I asked about her? You can tell me if you do." "No," he said. "Thinking about her is the next best thing." He poured 2 cups of tea. "Do you have any coffee?" I asked. "Coffee?" "It stunts my growth, and I'm afraid of death." He slapped the table and said, "My boy, I have some coffee from Honduras that's got your name on it." "But you don't even know my name." We sat around for a while, and he told me more about his amazing life. As far as he knew, which seemed pretty far, he was the only person still alive who had fought in both of the world wars. He'd been to Australia, Kenya, Pakistan, and Panama. I asked him, "If you had to guess, how many countries would you guess you've been to?" He said, "I wouldn't have to guess. 112. "Are there even that many countries?" He told me, "There are more places you haven't heard of than you've heard of." I loved that. He had reported almost every war of the 20th century, like the Spanish Civil War and the genocide in East Timor, and bad stuff that happened in Africa. I hadn't heard of any of them, so I tried to remember them so I could Google them when I got home. The list in my head was getting incredibly long. Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald, Powdering Her Nose, Churchill, Mustang Convertible, Walter Cronkite, Necking, The Bay of Pigs, LP, Datsun, Kent State, Lard, Polaroid, Apartheid, Drive-In, Favela, Trotsky, The Berlin Wall, Tito, Gone with the Wind, Frank Lloyd Wright, Hula Hoop, Technicolor, The Spanish Civil War, Grace Kelly, East Timor, Slide Rule, a bunch of places in Africa whose names I tried to remember but had already forgotten. It was getting hard to keep all the things I didn't know inside of me. His apartment was filled with the stuff he'd collected during the wars of his life, and I took pictures of them with Grandpa's camera. There were books in foreign languages, and little statues, and scrolls with pretty paintings, and Coke cans from around the world, and a bunch of rocks on his fireplace mantel, although all of them were common. One fascinating thing was that each rock had a little piece of paper next to it that said where the rock came from, and when it came from, like Normandy, 6/1944, Huachon-Dam, 4/09/51, and Dallas, 11/22/63. That was so fascinating, but one weird thing was that there were lots of bullets on the mantel, too, and they didn't have little pieces of paper next to them. I asked him how he knew which was which. "A bullet's a bullet's a bullet," he said. "But isn't a rock?" I asked. He said, "Of course not." I thought I understood him, but I wasn't positive, so I pointed at the roses in the vase on the table. "Is a rose a rose?" "No, a rose is not a rose is not a rose." And then for some reason I started thinking about something in the way she moves, so I asked,
Is a love song? He said,
Yes!
I thought for a second. Is love love? He said,
No!
He had a wall of masks from every country he'd ever been to, like Armenia and Chile and Ethiopia.
It's not a horrible world, he told me, putting a Cambodian mask on his face, but it's filled with a lot of horrible people.
I had another cup of coffee, and then I knew it was time to get to the point, so I took the key off my neck and gave it to him. Do you know what this opens?
Don't think so,
he hollered. Maybe you knew my dad.
Who is your dad?
His name was Thomas Shell. He lived in 5A until he died.
No, he said. That name doesn't ring a bell.
I asked if he was 100% sure. He said,
I've lived here long enough to know I'm not 100% anything.
And he got up, walked past the column in the dining room, and went over to the coat closet, which was tucked under the stairs. That was when I had the revelation that his apartment wasn't just like ours, because he had an upstairs. He opened the closet, and there was a library card catalog inside. Cool. He said,
This is my biographical index.
Your what?
I started it when I was just beginning to write. I'd create a card for everyone I thought I might need to reference one day. There's a card for everyone I ever wrote about, and cards for people I talked to on the course of writing my pieces, and cards for people I read books about, and cards for people in the footnotes of those books. In the morning, when I'd read the papers, I would make cards for everyone that seemed biographically significant. I still do it.
Why don't you just use the internet?
I don't have a computer.
That made me start to feel dizzy. How many cards do you have?
I've never counted. There must be tens of thousands by this point, maybe hundreds of thousands.
What do you write on them?
I write the name of the person in a one-word biography.
Just one word?
Everyone gets boiled down to one word.
And that's helpful?
It's hugely helpful. I read an article about Latin American currencies this morning. It referred to the work of someone named Manuel Escobar, so I came and looked up Escobar. Sure enough, he was in here. Manuel Escobar. Unionist.
But he's also probably a husband, or dad, or Beatles fan, or jogger. Who knows what else?
Sure. You could write a book about Manuel Escobar, and that would leave things out too. You could write 10 books. You could never stop writing.
He slid out drawers from the cabinet and pulled cards from the drawers, one after another.
Henry Kissinger. War. Ornette Coleman. Music. Che Guevara. War. Jeff Bezos. Money. Philip Guston. Art. Mahatma Gandhi. War.
But he was a pacifist, I said.
Right. War. Arthur Ashe. Tennis. Tom Cruise. Money. Elie Wiesel. War. Arnold Schwarzenegger. War. Martha Stewart. Money. Rem Koolhaas. Architecture. Ariel Sharon. War. Mick Jagger. Money. Seer Arafat. War. Susan Sontag. Thought. Wolfgang Puck. Money. Pope John Paul II. War.
I asked if he had a card for Stephen Hawking.
Of course, he said,
and slid out a drawer and pulled out a card. Stephen Hawking, Astrophysics. Do you have a card for yourself? He slid out a drawer. A.R. Black. War. Crossed out. Husband. So, do you have a card for my dad?
Thomas Shell, right?
Right. He went to the S drawer and pulled it halfway out. His fingers ran through the cards like the fingers of someone much younger than 103.
Sorry, nothing.
Could you double check? His fingers ran through the cards again. He shook his head.
Sorry.
Well, what if a card is filed in the wrong place?
Then we've got a problem.
Could it be?
It happens occasionally. Marilyn Monroe was lost in the index for more than a decade. I kept checking under Norma Jean Baker, thinking I was smart, but completely forgetting that she was born Norma Jean Mortensen.
Who's Norma Jean Mortensen?
Marilyn Monroe.
Who's Marilyn Monroe?
Sex.
Do you have a card for Muhammad Atta?
Atta. That one rings a bell. Let me see.
He opened the A drawer. I told him, Muhammad is the most common name on earth. He pulled out a card and said,
Bingo. Muhammad Atta. War.
I sat down on the floor. He asked what was wrong. It's just that why would you have one for him and not for my dad?
What do you mean?
It isn't fair.
What's not fair?
My dad was good. Muhammad Atta was evil.
So?
So my dad deserves to be in there.
What makes you think it's good to be in here?
Because it means you're biographically significant.
And why is that good?
I want to be significant.
9 out of 10 significant people have to do with money or war.
But still, it gave me heavy, heavy boots. Dad wasn't a great man, not like Winston Churchill, whoever he was. Dad was just someone who ran a family jewelry business, just an ordinary dad. But I wish so much then that he had been great. I wished he'd been famous. Famous like a movie star, which is what he deserved. I wish Mr. Black had written about him and risked his life to tell the world about him and had reminders of him around his apartment. I started thinking, if Dad were boiled down to one word, what would that word be? Jeweler? Atheist? Is copy editor one word?
You're looking for something, Mr. Black asked.
This key used to belong to my dad, I said, pulling it out from under my shirt again, and I want to know what it opens. He shrugged his shoulders and hollered, I'd want to know too. Then we were silent for a while. I thought I was going to cry, but I didn't want to cry in front of him, so I asked where the bathroom was. He pointed to the top of the stairs. As I walked up, I held the railing tight and started inventing things in my head. Airbags for skyscrapers, solar-powered limousines that never had to stop moving, a frictionless, perpetual yo-yo. The bathroom smelled like an old person, and some of the tiles that were supposed to be on the wall were on the floor. There's a photograph of a woman tucked in the corner of the mirror above the sink. She was sitting at the kitchen table that we were just sitting at, and she was wearing an enormous hat, even though she was inside, obviously. That's how I knew that she was special. One of her hands was on a teacup. Her smile was incredibly beautiful. I wondered if her palm was sweating condensation when the picture was taken. I wondered if Mr. Black took the picture. Before I went back down, I snooped around a little bit. I was impressed by how much life Mr. Black had lived and how much he wanted to have his life around him. I tried the key in all of the doors, even though he said he didn't recognize it. It's not that I didn't trust him, because I did. It's that at the end of my search, I wanted to be able to say, I don't know how I could have tried harder. One door was to a closet, which didn't have anything really interesting in it, just a bunch of coats. Behind another door was a room filled with boxes. I took the lids off a couple of them, and they were filled with newspapers. The newspapers in some of the boxes were yellow, and some were almost like leaves. I looked in another room, which must have been his bedroom. There was the most amazing bed I have ever seen, because it was made out of tree parts. The legs were stumps, the ends were logs, and there was a ceiling of branches. Also, there were all sorts of fascinating metal things glued to it, like coins, pins, and a button that just said Roosevelt.
To be a tree in the park,
Mr. Black said from behind me, which scared me so much that my hand started shaking. I asked, Are you mad at me for snooping? But he must not have heard me because he just kept talking.
She tripped on its roots once. That was back when I was courting her. She fell down and cut her hand. A little cut, but I never forgot it. That was so long ago.
But yesterday in your life, right?
Yesterday, today, 5 minutes ago, now.
He aimed his eyes at the ground.
Reporting a break. She wanted me at home.
He shook his head and said,
But there were things I needed too.
He looked at the floor and then back at me. I asked, So what did you do?
Well, for most of our marriage, I treated her as though she didn't matter. I came home only between wars and I left her alone for months at a time. There was always war.
Did you know that in the last 3,500 years, there have only been 230 years of peace throughout the civilized world? He said,
You tell me which 230 years and I'll believe you.
I don't know which, but I know it's true.
And where's this civilized world you're referring to?
I asked him what happened to make him stop reporting war. He said,
I realized that what I wanted was to stay in one place with one person.
So you came home for good?
It was her over war. And the first thing I did when I came back, even before I went home, was to go to the park and cut down that tree. It was the middle of the night. I thought someone would try and stop me, but no one did. I brought the pieces home with me. I made that tree into this bed. It was the bed we shared for the last years we had together. I wish I'd understood myself better earlier.
I asked, Which was your last war?
He said, Cutting down that tree was my last war.
I asked him who won, which I thought was a nice question because it would let him say that he won and feel proud. He said,
The axe won. It's always that way.
He went up to the bed and put his finger on the head of a nail.
See these?
I try to be a perceptive person who follows the scientific method and is observant, but I hadn't noticed before that the whole bed was completely covered in nails.
I've hammered a nail into the bed every morning since she died. It's the first thing I do after waking. 8,629 nails.
I asked him why, which I thought was another nice question because I thought it would let him tell me about how much he loved her. He said,
I don't know.
I said, But if you don't know, then why do you do it?
I suppose it helps. Keeps me going. I know it's nonsense.
I don't think it's nonsense.
Nails aren't light. One is. A handful are, but they add up.
I told him, The average human body contains enough iron to make a 1-inch nail. He said,
The bed got heavy. I could hear the floor straining, like it was in pain. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night afraid that everything would go crashing in the apartment below. You couldn't sleep because of me. So I built that column downstairs. Do you know about the library at Indiana University?
No, I said, but I was still thinking about the column.
It's sinking a little more than an inch a year because when they built it, they didn't take into account the weight of all the books. I wrote a piece about it. I didn't make the connection then, but now I'm thinking of Debussy's Sunken Cathedral, one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written. I haven't heard it in years and years. Do you want to feel something?
Okay, I said, because even though I didn't know him, I felt like I knew him.
Open your hand, he said, so I did.
He reached into his pocket and took out a paperclip. He pressed it into my hand and said,
make a fist around it.
So I did.
Now, extend your hand.
I extended my hand.
Now open your hand.
The paperclip flew to the bed. It was only then that I observed that the key was reaching towards the bed. Because it was relatively heavy, the effect was small. The string pulled incredibly gently at the back of my neck, while the key floated just a tiny bit off my chest. I thought about all the metal buried in Central Park. Was it being pulled, even if just a little, to the bed? Black closed his hand around the floating key and said,
I haven't left the apartment in 24 years.
What do you mean?
Sadly, my boy, I mean exactly what I said. I haven't left the apartment in 24 years. My feet haven't touched the ground.
Why not?
There hasn't been any reason to.
What about stuff you need?
What does someone like me need that he still can't get?
Food, books, stuff?
I call in an order for food and they bring it to me. I call the bookstore for books, the video store for movies, pens, stationery, cleaning supplies, medicine. I even order my clothes over the phone. See this?
He said, and he showed me his muscle, which went down instead of up.
I was flyweight champion for 9 days.
I asked, which 9 days?
He said, don't you believe me?
I said, of course I do.
The world is a big place, he said, but so's the inside of an apartment. So's this, he said, pointing at his head.
You used to travel so much. You had so many experiences. Don't you miss the world?
I do, very much.
My boots were so heavy that I was glad that there was a column underneath us. How could such a lonely person have been living so close to me my whole life? If I had known, I would have gone up to keep him company, or I would have made some jewelry for him, or told him hilarious jokes, or given him a private tambourine concert. It made me start to wonder if there were other people so lonely so close. I thought about Eleanor Rigby. It's true, where do they all come from, and where do they all belong? If the water that came out of the shower was treated with a chemical that responded to a combination of things, like your heartbeat and your body temperature and your brain waves, so that your skin changed color according to your mood. If you were extremely excited, your skin would turn green, and if you were angry, you'd turn red, obviously. And if you felt like shiitake, you'd turn brown. And if you were blue, you'd turn blue. Everyone could know what everyone else felt, and we could be more careful with each other, because you'd never want to tell a person whose skin was purple that you're angry at her for being late, just like you would want to pat a person that was pink on the back and tell him, "Congratulations." The reason it would be a good invention is that there are so many times when you know you're feeling a lot of something, but you don't know what the something is. Am I frustrated? Am I actually just panicky? And that confusion changes your mood. It becomes your mood, and you become a confused gray person. But with the special water, you could just look at your orange hand and think, "Oh, I'm happy. That whole time I was actually happy. What a relief." Mr. Black said,
I once went to a report on a village in Russia, a community of artists who were forced to flee the cities. I'd heard that paintings hung everywhere. I heard you couldn't see the walls through all the paintings. They'd painted the ceilings, the plates, the windows, the lampshades. Was it an act of rebellion? An act of expression? Were the paintings good, or was that beside the point? I needed to see it for myself. I needed to tell the world about it. I used to live for reporting like that. Stalin found out about the community and sent in thugs just a few days before I got there to break all their arms. That was worse than killing them. It was a horrible sight, Oskar. Their arms in crude splints, straight in front of them like zombies. They couldn't feed themselves because they couldn't get their hands to their mouths. So you know what they did?
They starved.
They fed each other. That's the difference between heaven and hell. In hell, we starve. In heaven, we feed each other.
I don't believe in the afterlife.
Neither do I, but I believe in the story.
And then, all of a sudden, I thought of something. Something enormous. Something wonderful. Do you want to help me?
Excuse me?
With the key.
Help you?
You could go around with me.
You want my help?
Yes.
Well, I don't need anyone's charity.
Jose, I told him, you're obviously very smart and knowledgeable, and you know a ton of things that I don't know, and also, it's just good to have company, so please say yes. He closed his eyes and became quiet. I couldn't tell if he was thinking about what we were talking about, or thinking about something else, or if maybe he'd just fallen asleep, which I know that old people like Grandma sometimes do, because they can't help it. You don't have to make a decision right now, I said, because I didn't want him to feel forced. I told him about the 162 million locks and how the search would probably take a long time. It might even take the full 1.5 years. So if he wanted to think about it for a while, that would be okay. He could just come downstairs and tell me his answer whenever. He kept thinking, as long as you want, I said. He kept thinking. I asked him, do you have a decision? He didn't say anything. What do you think, Mr. Black? Nothing. Mr. Black? I tapped him on the shoulder and he looked up suddenly. Hello? I smiled, like I do when Mom finds out about something I did that I shouldn't have done.
I've been reading your lips.
What? He pointed at his hearing aids, which I hadn't noticed before, even though I was trying as hard as I could to notice everything.
I turned them off long time ago.
You turned them off?
A long, long time ago.
On purpose?
I thought I'd save the batteries.
For what? He shrugged his shoulders. But you don't want to hear things? He shrugged his shoulders again in a way so that I couldn't tell if he was saying yes or no. And then I thought of something else, something beautiful, something true. Do you want me to turn them on for you? He looked at me and through me at the same time, like I was a stained glass window. I asked again, moving my lips slowly and carefully so that I could be sure he understood me. Do you want me to turn them on for you? He kept looking at me. I asked again. He said,
I don't know how to say yes.
I told him, you don't have to. I went behind him and saw a tiny dial on the back of each of his hearing aids.
Do it slowly,
he said, almost as if he was begging me.
It's been a long, long time.
I went back around to his front so he could see my lips, and I promised him I would be as gentle as I could. Then I went back behind him and turned the dials extremely slowly, a few millimeters at a time. Nothing happened. I turned them a few more millimeters, and then just a few more. I went around to the front of him. He shrugged, and so did I. I went back around behind him and turned them up just a tiny bit more until they stopped. I went back in front of him. He shrugged. Maybe the hearing aids didn't work anymore, or maybe the batteries had died of old age. Or maybe he'd just gone completely deaf since he turned them off, which was possible. We looked at each other. Then out of nowhere, a flock of birds flew by the window, extremely fast and incredibly close. Maybe 20 of them, maybe more. They also seemed just like one bird because somehow they all knew exactly what to do. Mr. Black grabbed at his ears and made a bunch of weird sounds. He started crying, not out of happiness, I could tell, but not out of sadness either. Are you okay? I whispered. The sound of my voice made him cry more, and he nodded his head yes. I asked him if he wanted me to make some more noise. He nodded yes, which shook more tears down his cheeks. I went to the bed and rattled it so that a bunch of the pins and paper clips fell off. He cried more tears. Do you want me to turn them off? I asked, but he wasn't paying attention to me anymore. He was walking around the room, sticking his ears up to anything that made noise, including very quiet things like pipes. I wanted to stay there watching him hear the world, but it was getting late and I had a Hamlet rehearsal at 4:30, and it was an extremely important rehearsal because it was the first one with the lighting effects. I told Mr. Black that I would pick him up the next Saturday at 7 o'clock and we would start then. I told him, I'm not even through with the A's. He said, okay, and the sound of his own voice made him cry the most. Message 3, 9:31 a.m. Hello? 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 When Mom tucked me in that night, she could tell that something was on my mind and asked if I wanted to talk. I did, but not to her, so I said, no offense, but no. Are you sure? Très fatigue, I said, waving my hand. Do you want me to read something to you? It's okay. We could go through the New York Times for mistakes. No, thank you. All right, she said. All right. She gave me a kiss and turned off the light, and then as she was about to go, I said, Mom? And she said, yes. And I said, do you promise not to bury me when I die? She came back over and put her hand on my cheek and said, you're not going to die. I told her, I am. She said, you're not going to die anytime soon. You have a long, long life ahead of you. I told her, As you know, I'm extremely brave, but I can't spend eternity in a small underground place. I just can't. Do you love me? Of course I love you. Then put me in one of those mausoleum thingies. A mausoleum? Like I read about. Do we have to talk about this? Yes. Now? Yes. Why? Because what if I die tomorrow? You're not going to die tomorrow. Dad didn't think he was going to die the next day. That's not going to happen to you. It wasn't going to happen to him. Oskar, I'm sorry, but I just can't be buried. Don't you want to be with Dad and me? Dad isn't even there. Excuse me? His body was destroyed. Don't talk like that. Talk like what? It's the truth. I don't understand why everyone pretends he's there. Take it easy, Oskar. It's just an empty box. It's more than an empty box. Why would I want to spend eternity next to an empty box? His spirit is there. But that made me really angry. I told her, Dad didn't have a spirit. He had cells. His memory is there. His memory is here, I said, pointing at my head. Dad had a spirit, she said, winding a bit in our conversation. I told her, he had cells, and now they're on rooftops, and in the river, and in the lungs of millions of people around New York, who breathe him in every time they speak. You shouldn't say things like that. But it's the truth. Why can't I say the truth? You're getting out of control. Just because Dad died, it doesn't mean that you can be illogical, Mom. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Get a hold of yourself, Oskar. Fuck you. Excuse me? Sorry, I mean screw you. You need a timeout. I need a mausoleum. Oskar! Don't lie to me. Who's lying? Where were you? Where was I when? That day. What day? The day. What do you mean? Where were you? I was at work. Why weren't you at home? Because I have to go to work. Why didn't you pick me up from school like the other moms? Oskar, I came home as soon as I could. It takes longer for me to get home than for you to. I thought it would be better to meet you at the apartment than make you wait at school for me to get to you. Home when I got home. I wish I had been, but it wasn't possible. You should have made it possible. I can't make the impossible possible. You should have, she said. I got home as quickly as I could, and then she started crying. The axe was winning. My cheek against her. I don't need anything fancy, Mom. Just something above ground. She took a deep breath, put her arm around me, and said, That might be possible. I tried to think of some way to be hilarious because I thought that maybe if I was hilarious, she wouldn't be mad at me anymore, and I could be safe again. With a little elbow room? What? I'm gonna need a little elbow room. She smiled and said, Okay. I sniffed again because I could tell that it was working. And a bidet. Absolutely. One bidet coming up. And some electrical fencing? Electrical fencing? So that grave robbers won't try to steal any of my jewels. Jewels? Yeah, I said. I'm gonna need some jewels, too. Together, which was necessary because she loved me again. I pulled my feelings book from under my pillow, flipped to the current page, and downgraded from desperate to mediocre. Hey, that's great, Mom said, looking over my shoulder. No, I said, it's mediocre, and please don't snoop. Which was nice, although I had to turn a little so she wouldn't feel that I still had my key on, and that there were 2 keys. Mom? Yes? Nothing. What is it, baby? Well, it's just that, wouldn't it be great if mattresses had spaces for your arms so that when you rolled onto your side you could just fit in just right? That would be nice. And good for your back, probably, because it would let your spine be straight, which I know is important. That is important. Also, it would make snuggling easier. You know how that arm constantly gets in the way? I do. And making snuggling easier is very important. Very. Mediocre to optimistic, but realistic. I miss Dad. So do I. Do you? Of course I do. But do you really? How could you ask that? It's just that you don't act like you miss him very much. What are you talking about? I think you know what I'm talking about. I don't. I hear you laughing. You hear me laughing? In the living room with Ron. You think that because I laugh every now and then I don't miss Dad? I rolled onto my side away from her. Optimistic but realistic to extremely depressed. She said, I cry a lot too, you know.
I don't see you cry a lot.
Well, maybe that's because I don't want you to see me cry a lot.
Why not?
Because that isn't fair to either of us.
Yes, it is.
I want us to move on.
How much do you cry?
How much?
A spoonful, a cup, a bathtub, if you added it up.
It doesn't work like that.
Like what?
She said, I'm trying to find ways to be happy. Laughing makes me happy.
I said, I'm not trying to find ways to be happy, and I won't.
She said, well, you should.
Why?
Well, because Dad would want you to be happy.
Dad would want me to remember him.
Why can't you remember him and be happy?
Why are you in love with Ron? You're obviously in love with him. So what I want to know is, why? What's so great about him?
Oskar, did it ever occur to you that things might be more complicated than they seem?
That occurs to me all the time.
Ron is my friend.
So then promise me you won't ever fall in love again.
Oskar, Ron is going through a lot too. We help each other. We're friends.
Promise me you won't fall in love.
Why would you ask me to promise that?
Either promise me you'll never fall in love again, or I'm going to stop loving you.
You're not being fair.
I don't have to be fair. I'm your son.
She let out an enormous breath and said, You remind me so much of your dad.
I said something that I wasn't planning on saying and didn't even want to say. As it came out of my mouth, I was ashamed that it was mixed with any of my dad's cells that I might have inhaled when we went to visit Ground Zero. If I could have chosen, I would have chosen you.
She looked at me for a second, then stood up and walked out of the room. I wish she'd slammed the door, but she didn't. She closed it carefully, like she always did. I could hear that she didn't walk away. Extremely depressed to incredibly alone. Mom? Nothing. I went to the door. I take it back. She didn't say anything, but I could hear her breathing. I put my hand on the doorknob because I thought maybe her hand was on the doorknob on the other side. I said I take it back. You can't take something like that back. Can you apologize for something like that? Nothing. Do you accept my apology? I don't know. How can you not know? Oskar, I don't know. Are you mad at me? Nothing. Mom? Yes? Are you still mad at me? No. Are you sure? I was never mad at you. What were you? Hurt. Incredibly alone, too. I guess I fell asleep on the floor. When I woke up, Mom was pulling my shirt off to help me get into my PJs, which means she must have seen all my bruises. I counted them last night in the mirror, and there were 41. Some of them have gotten big, but most of them are small. I don't put them there for her, but I still want her to ask me how I got them, even though she probably knows, and to feel sorry for me, because she should realize how hard things are for me, and to feel terrible, because at least some of it is her fault, and to promise me that she won't die and leave me alone, but she didn't say anything. I couldn't even see the look in her eyes when she saw the bruises, because my shirt was over my head, covering my face like a pocket or a skull. Chapter 8. My Feelings. Bouncing flights over the speakers. We are not listening. They do not matter to us because we're not going anywhere. I miss you already, Oskar. I missed you even when I was with you. That's my problem. I miss what I already have, and I surround myself with things that are missing. When I put in a new page, I look at your grandfather. I am so relieved to see his face. It makes me feel safe. His spine is curved. In Dresden, he was a giant. I'm glad that his hands are still rough. The sculptures never left them. I didn't notice until now that he is still wearing his wedding ring. I wonder if he put it on when he came back or if he wore it all those years. Here I locked up the apartment. I turned off the lights and made sure none of the faucets leaked. It's hard to say goodbye to a place that you lived. It can be as hard as saying goodbye to a person. When we were married, it had more room than his apartment. We needed it. We needed room for all the animals, and we needed room between us. Your grandfather bought the most expensive insurance policy. A man from the company came over to take pictures. If anything happened, they'd be able to rebuild the apartment exactly how it was again. He took a roll of film. He took a picture of the floor, a picture of the fireplace, a picture of the bathtub. I never confused what I had with what I was. When the man left, your grandfather took out his own camera and started taking more pictures. What are you doing? I asked him. Better safe than sorry, he wrote. At the time, I thought he was right, but I'm not sure anymore. Everything, of the undersides of the shelves in the closet, of the backs of the mirrors, even the broken things, the things that you wouldn't want to remember. He could have rebuilt the apartment by taping together the pictures. And the doorknobs, he took a picture of every doorknob in the apartment, every one, as if the world and its future depend on each doorknob. Thinking about doorknobs, should we ever actually need to use the pictures of them? Why, that hurt me so much. I told him, "They're not even nice doorknobs." He wrote, "But they are our doorknobs." I was his too. He never took pictures of me, and we didn't buy life insurance. He kept one set of the pictures in his dresser. He taped another set into his daybooks so that they'd always be with him in case something happened at home. Our marriage was not unhappy, Oskar. He knew how to make me laugh, and sometimes I made him laugh. We had to make rules, but who doesn't? There's nothing wrong with compromising, even if you compromise almost everything. He got a job at a jewelry store because he knew the machines. He worked so hard that they made him assistant manager and then manager. He did not care about jewelry. He hated it. He used to say jewelry is the opposite of sculpture, but it was a living, and he promised me that that was okay. We had our own store in a neighborhood that was next to a bad neighborhood. It was open from 11 in the morning until 6 at night, but there was always work to be done. We spent our lives making livings. Sometimes he would go to the airport after work. I asked him to get me papers and magazines. At first it was because I wanted to learn American expressions, but I gave up on that. I still asked him to go. I knew that he needed my permission to go. It was not out of kindness that I sent him. We tried so hard. We were always trying to help each other. But not because we were helpless. He needed to get things for me just as I needed to get things for him. It gave us purpose. Sometimes I would ask him for something that I didn't even want, just to let him get it for me. We spent our days trying to help each other. I would get his slippers, he would make my tea, I would turn up the heat so he could turn up the air conditioner so I could turn up the heat. His hands didn't lose their roughness. It was Halloween, our first in the apartment. The doorbell rang. Your grandfather was at the airport. I opened the door and a child was standing there in a white sheet with holes cut out for eyes. "Trick or treat," she said. I took a step back. "Who is that?" "I'm a ghost." "What are you wearing that for?" "It's Halloween." "I don't know what that means." "Kids dress up and knock on doors, and you give them candy." "I don't have any candy." "But it's Halloween." I told her to wait. I went to the bedroom. I took an envelope from underneath the mattress. Our savings, our living. I took out 2 $100 bills and put them in a different envelope, which I gave to the ghost. I was paying her to go away. I closed the door and turned off the lights so no more children would ring our doorbell. The animals must have understood because they surrounded me and pressed into me. I didn't say anything when your grandfather came home that night. I thanked him for the papers and the magazines. I went to the guest room and pretended to write. I hit the space bar again and again and again and again. My life story was spaces. The days passed one at a time, and sometimes less than one at a time. We looked at each other and drew maps in our heads. I told him my eyes were crummy because I wanted him to pay attention to me. We made safe places in the apartment where you could go and not exist. I would have done anything for him. Maybe that was my sickness. We made love in nothing places and turned the lights off. It felt like crying. We could not look at each other. It always had to be from behind, like that first time, and I knew that he wasn't thinking of me. He squeezed my side so hard and pushed so hard like he was trying to push through me to somewhere else. Why does anyone ever make love? A year passed, another year, another. We made livings. I never forgot about the ghost. I needed a child. What does it mean to need a child? One morning I awoke and I understood the hole in the middle of me. I realized that I could compromise my life, but not life after me. I couldn't explain it. The need came before explanations. It was not out of weakness that I made it happen, but it was not out of strength either. It was out of need. I needed a child. I tried to hide it from him. I tried to wait to tell him until it was too late to do anything about it. It was the ultimate secret. Life. I kept it safe inside me. I took it around, like the apartment was inside his books. I wore loose shirts. I sat with pillows on my lap. I was naked only in nothing places. But I could not keep it a secret forever. We were lying in bed in the darkness. I did not know how to say it. I knew, but I couldn't say it. I took one of his day books from the bedside table. The apartment had never been darker. I turned on the lamp. It became bright around us. The apartment became darker. I wrote, "I'm pregnant." I handed it to him, and he read it. He took the pen and wrote, "How could that have happened?" I wrote, "I made it happen." He wrote, "But we had a rule." The next page was a doorknob. I turned the page and wrote, "I broke the rule." He sat up in bed. I don't know how much time passed. He wrote, "Everything will be okay." I told him okay wasn't enough. Everything will be perfect. I told him there was nothing left for a lie to protect. Everything will be. I started to cry. It was the first time I ever cried in front of him. It felt like making love. I asked him something I had needed to know since we made that first nothing place years before. What are we? Something or nothing? He covered my face with his hands and lifted them off. I did not know what that meant. The next morning I woke up with a terrible cold. I did not know if the baby was making me sick or if your grandfather was. When I said goodbye to him before he left for the airport, I lifted his suitcase and it felt heavy. This was how I knew he was leaving me. I wondered if I should stop him, if I should wrestle him to the ground and force him to love me. I wanted to hold his shoulders down and shout into his face. I followed him there. I watched him all morning. I did not know how to talk to him. I watched him write in his book. I watched him ask people what time it was, although each person just pointed at the big yellow clock on the wall. It was so strange to see him from a distance, so small. I cared for him in the world as I could not care for him in the apartment. I wanted to protect him from all the terrible things that no one deserves. I got very close to him, just behind him. I watched him write. It's a shame that we have to live, but it's a tragedy that we only get to live one life. I stepped back. I could not be that close, not even then. From behind a column I watched him write more, and ask for the time, and rub his rough hands against his knees, yes and no. I watched him get in the line to buy tickets. I wondered, when am I going to stop him from leaving? I didn't know how to ask him or tell him or beg him. When he got to the front of the line, I went up to him. I touched his shoulder. I can see, I said. What a stupid thing to say. My eyes are crummy, but I can see. What are you doing here? He wrote with his hands. I felt suddenly shy. I was not used to shy. I was used to shame. Shyness is when you turn your head away from something you want. Shame is when you turn your head away from something you do not want. I know you're leaving, I said. You have to go home, he wrote. You should be in bed. Okay, I said. I did not know how to say what I needed to say. Let me take you home. No, I do not want to go home. He wrote, You're being crazy. You're going to catch a cold. I already have a cold. You're going to catch a colder. I could not believe he was making a joke, and I could not believe I laughed. The laughter sent my thoughts to our kitchen table where we would laugh and laugh. That table was where we were close to each other. It was instead of our bed. Everything in our apartment got confused. We would eat at the coffee table in the living room instead of at the dining room table. We wanted to be near the window. We filled the body of the grandfather clock with his empty daybooks as if they were time itself. We put his filled daybooks in the bathtub on the second bathroom because we never used it. I sleepwalk when I sleep at all. Once I turned on the shower. Some of the books floated and some stayed where they were. When I awoke the next morning, I saw what I had done. The water was gray with all of his days. I am not being crazy, I told him. You have to go home. I got tired, I told him. Not worn out, but worn though. Like one of those wives who wakes up one morning and says, I can't bake any more bread. You never baked bread, he wrote, and we were still joking. Then it's like I woke up and baked bread, I said, and we were joking even then. I wondered, will there come a time when we weren't joking? And what would that look like? And how would that feel? When I was a girl, my life was music. That was always getting louder. Everything moved me. A dog following a stranger, that made me feel so much. A calendar that showed the wrong month. I would have cried over it. I did. Where the smoke from the chimney ended, how an overturned bottle rested on the edge of a table. I spent my life learning to feel less. Every day I felt less. Is that growing old? Or is it something worse? You cannot protect yourself from sadness without protecting yourself from happiness. He hid his face in the covers of his daybook, as if the covers were his hands. He cried. For whom was he crying? For Anna? For his parents? For me? For himself? I pulled the book from him. It was wet with tears running down the pages as if the book itself were crying. He hid his face in his hands. Let me see you cry, I told him. I do not want to hurt you, he said, by shaking his head left to right. It hurts me when you do not want to hurt me, I told him. Let me see you cry. He lowered his hands. On one cheek, it said yes backwards. On one cheek, it said no backwards. He was still looking down. Now the tears did not run down his cheeks, but fell from his eyes on the ground. Let me see you cry, I said. I did not feel that he owed it to me, and I did not feel that I owed it to him. We owed it to each other, which is something different. He raised his head and looked at me. I'm not angry with you, I told him. You must be. I'm the one who broke the rule. But I'm the one who made the rule you couldn't live with. My thoughts are wandering, Oskar. They're going to Dresden, to my mother's pearls damp with the sweat of her neck. My thoughts are going up the sleeve of my father's overcoat. His arm was so thick and strong, I was sure it would protect me for as long as I lived. And it did, even after I lost him. The memory of his arm wraps around me, as his arm used to. Each day has been chained to the previous one, but the weeks have had wings. Anyone who believes that a second is faster than a decade did not live my life. Why are you leaving me? He wrote, I do not know how to live. I do not know either, but I'm trying. I don't know how to try. There are things I wanted to tell him, but I knew that they would hurt him, so I buried them and let them hurt me. I put my hand on him. Touching him was always so important to me. It was something I lived for. I never could explain why. Little nothing touches. My fingers against his shoulder, the outsides of our thighs touching as we squeezed together on the bus. I couldn't explain it, but I needed it. Sometimes I imagined stitching all of our little touches together. How many hundreds of thousands of fingers brushing against each other does it take to make love? Why does anyone ever make love? My thoughts are going to my childhood, Oskar, to when I was a girl. I'm sitting here thinking about fistfuls of pebbles and the first time I noticed hairs under my arms. My thoughts are around my mother's neck, her pearls, when I first liked the smell of perfume and how Anna and I would lie in the darkness of our bedroom in the warmth of our bed. I told her one night what I had seen behind the shed behind our house. She made me promise never to speak a word about it. I promised her. Can I watch you kiss? Can you watch us kiss? You could tell me where you're going to kiss and I could hide and watch. She laughed, which was how she said yes. We woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know who woke up first or if we woke up at the same time. What does it feel like? I asked her. What does what feel like? To kiss. She laughed. It feels wet, she said. I laughed. It feels wet and warm and very strange at first. I laughed. Like this, she said, and she grabbed the sides of my face and pulled me into her. I've never felt so in love in my life, and I've never felt so in love since. We are innocent. How could anything be more innocent than the two of us kissing in that bed? How could anything less deserve to be destroyed? I told him, I will try harder if you stay. Okay, he wrote. Just please do not leave me. Okay. We never have to mention this. Okay. I'm thinking about shoes for some reason. How many pairs I've worn in my life, and how many times my feet have slipped into and out of them, and how I put them at the foot of the bed, pointing away from the bed. My thoughts are going down a chimney and burning. Footsteps above, frying onions, clinking crystal. We were not rich, but there was nothing we wanted. From my bedroom window, I watched the world, and I was safe from the world. I watched my father fall apart. The nearer the war came, the farther he went. Was that the only way he knew how to protect us? He spent hours in his shed every night. Sometimes he would sleep in there, on the floor. He wanted to save the world. That's what he was like. But he wouldn't put our family in danger. That's what he was like. He must have weighed my life against a life he might have been able to save. Or 10, or 100. He must have decided that my life weighed more than 100 lives. His hair turned gray that winter. I thought it was snow. He promised us that everything would be okay. I was a child, but I knew that everything would not be okay. That did not make my father a liar. It made him my father. It was the morning of the bombing that I decided to write back to the forced laborer. I don't know why I waited for so long or what made me want to write to him then. He asked me to include a photograph of myself. I did not have any photographs of myself that I like. I understand now the tragedy of my childhood. It wasn't the bombing. It was that I never once liked a photograph of myself. I couldn't. I decided I would go to a photographer the next day and have a picture taken. That night, I tried on all my outfits in front of the mirror. I felt like an ugly movie star. I asked my mother to teach me about makeup. She didn't ask why. She showed me how to rouge my cheeks and how to paint my eyes. She had never touched my face so much. There had never been an excuse to. My forehead, my chin, my temples, my neck. Why was she crying? I left the unfinished letter on my desk. The paper helped our house burn. I should have sent it off with an ugly photograph. I should have sent off everything. The airport was filled with people coming and going, but it was only your grandfather and me. I took his daybook and searched its pages. I pointed at, how frustrating, how pathetic, how sad. He searched through the book and pointed at, the way you just handed me that knife. I pointed at, if I'd been someone else in a different world, I'd have done something different. He pointed at, sometimes one simply wants to disappear. I pointed at, there's nothing wrong with not understanding yourself. He pointed at, how sad. I pointed at, and I wouldn't say no to something sweet. He pointed at, cried and cried and cried. I pointed at, don't cry. He pointed at, broken and confused. I pointed at, so sad. He pointed at, broken and confused. I pointed at, something. He pointed at, nothing. I pointed at, something. Nobody pointed at, I love you. There was no way around it. We could not climb over it or walk until we found its edge. I regret that it takes a life to learn how to live, Oskar, because if I were able to live my life again, I would do things differently. I would change my life. I would kiss my piano teacher even if he laughed at me. I would jump with Mary on the bed even if I made a fool of myself. I would send out ugly photographs, thousands of them. What are we going to do? He wrote. It's up to you, I said. He wrote, I want to go home. What's home to you? Home is the place with the most rules. I understood him. And we will have to make more rules, I said, to make it more of a home. Yes. Okay. We went straight to the jewelry store. He left the suitcase in the back room. We sold a pair of emerald earrings that day, a diamond engagement ring, and a gold bracelet for a little girl, and a watch for someone on his way to Brazil. That night we held each other in bed. He kissed me all over. I believed him. I was not stupid. I was his wife. The next morning, he went to the airport. I didn't dare feel his suitcase. I waited for him to come home. Hours passed, and minutes. I didn't open the store at 11. I waited by the window. I still believed in him. I didn't eat lunch. Seconds passed. The afternoon left. The evening came. I didn't eat dinner. Years were passing through the spaces between moments. Your father kicked in my belly. What was he trying to tell me? I brought the bird cages to the windows. I opened the windows and opened the bird cages. I poured the fish down the drain, took the dogs and cats downstairs and removed their collars. I released the insects onto the street, and the reptiles. And the mice. I told them, go. All of you, go. And they went. And they didn't come back.